It was almost 9 when someone knocked on my door. The sound was polite at first, 3 quick taps, like a neighbor who knows the building is quiet and doesn't want to wake anyone. Then a softer, urgent flutter that made me set down the mug I was holding. I opened to find Talita standing there in the hallway, palms gripping the strap of her small bag so hard the knuckles were white. Her eyes were wide in that particular way that belongs to people who haven't finished deciding whether to cry or ask for help. "Please," she said, voice thin. "My father, he collapsed. I don't know what to do." There was an ambulance already on its way, she said. She'd run down the stairs to look for someone. She smelled like nervous perfume in the metallic heat of the stairwell. I could see the building's elevator behind her, the fluorescent buzz of the lobby, the concierge's little lamp blinking as if granting permission. I could also see the couch through her open living room curtain. A low beige thing that had seen one too many friends, one too many deliveries, and on it a backpack I thought I would recognize in a pile of laundry. The backpack was dark canvas, worn at the corners, a frayed strap where someone had once mended the stitching. There was a faint smear on the leather handle, almost like an old coffee ring. A small embroidered tag, my initials, peeked from the inside of the flap. For a beat, the world thinned to the bag on her couch and the way the strap looped over the armrest. I knew that backpack. I had bought it for him 3 years before on our anniversary. I had taken it to the tailor once after it caught on the fence in the backyard and had stitched the initials because he'd teased me about losing everything with no name on it. I knew that frayed strap because I had tugged it when I was angry and he'd laughed and promised he'd fix it someday. It was his backpack. My first movement was practical. The man on Talita's floor was unconscious on the tile, gray in the face, and Talita was sobbing as she crouched next to him. I stepped in because the person on my threshold needed me to, and because before anything else I was a neighbor who could not pretend not to see a human being who might be dying. I checked for breathing with the sloppy competence of someone who had read emergency instructions, called the ambulance again to make sure they hadn't been rerouted, and tilted his head to clear his airway in a way that felt instinctual and precise. I knelt with Talita and tried to make room for her grief, saying the things that held her like a raft. "He's here. Help is coming. Breathe with me. Tell me how long this started." The man came to slowly, confused and brittle, and when he turned his head, his eyes were milky with pain and relief. The paramedics arrived in a rush of practiced calm, and we stepped back into the doorway, watching them lift him gently onto the stretcher. I could have made a scene then, could have pointed at the pack and demanded answers. I did not. Talita's hands were trembling. She was small and young in the face of her father's suffering, and I had been the one he had first seen when consciousness blurred. I wanted no part of turning a moment of fragility into a spectacle, so I helped where I could, holding a coat over the man's shoulders, finding his wallet among scattered receipts, and closed my door with a different kind of echo inside my chest. Back at home, the apartment felt too loud. The kettle I had left to boil had long since stopped. The mug had gone cold. I went to Roberto's office, his desk, and found the space empty of his small litter of things he always left behind. A bent pair of reading glasses, a half-used pen, a calendar page dog-eared to a business trip that never happened. His backpack wasn't on the hook by the door where he always dropped it. I checked the closet. Nothing. My rational mind began doing the arithmetic of absence, where things live, who moves them, which arrays of behavior matched absence, and then the phone buzzed. A message from him. Late, might sleep at the office, don't wait up. Short, the way he'd written in a text to close a day. That text should have been just a text. It should have been the small convenience of a partner who needed to finish a spreadsheet. Instead, it landed next to the image of his backpack on Talita's couch, and suddenly anything plausible about schedules and deadlines sounded like an excuse. I sat on the edge of our bed feeling the weight of the two things, bag on stranger's couch, might sleep at the office, press against me. In that press something shifted in me from startled to focused. I did not want drama, I wanted to know. If this reaches you, and you are drawn to the quiet ways truth arrives, consider subscribing. You'll find more stories like this, small revolutions of dignity, told plainly. Over the next few days, I began to notice the converging parts of a pattern, as if small nails were being driven at the same place until they formed a map. Some of them were almost ordinary. a trace of floral perfume on his cotton shirt after a week of laundry, a shoe I didn't recognize scuffed at the toe, women's flats, if I had to assign a genre to them, hidden by the bottom shelf of our shared closet, the click of a car door in the underground at odd hours when he said there was nothing left to do at work. Some of them were more tangible, a receipt for a small bouquet from a florist 2 blocks from Talita's apartment, charged to the business card he kept in his wallet, which we both used for company things. I found an email preview open on his laptop when he left it on the kitchen counter one evening. It was a message from an address that used a pet name I had not heard since the early months of our marriage. It took up space in my chest in a way that the other small items did not. It felt like the first proof that the things I was collecting were not merely coincidences but stitches in something deliberate. I told Paula what I was finding when she met me for coffee. She had always been the kind of friend who could hold a secret and offer a plan, a woman whose kindness had corners of practical steel. "Don't do anything dramatic," she said immediately. She had read me well, and when I saw the look in her face that I did not need to voice, she added, "But gather things, for you." She did not say confront him, or start a fight, or leave now. She said, in the softest way her voice could manage, protect yourself. And protection for the first week meant being quiet and thorough. There is a particular humility to working methodically through an intimate betrayal. It is not loud. It does not hurl accusations. It is collection, careful and precise, like cataloging an inheritance you are not ready to accept. I made a folder on my laptop and labeled it with a date. Into it, I dropped screenshots of messages that he had left signed in on and left open on shared devices, clear photographs of receipts I could prove were charged to our joint account, and notes of times when his patterns no longer matched what he told me. All of it was lawful, things I had lawful access to because he had carelessly left devices unlocked, or because our accounts were joint, and I had the right to view transactions. I took photographs from public places, photos I could take from the cafe window on the street or the sidewalk by the curb, never stooping to sneaking into his car or rifling through drawers. The rules were simple. Observe when visible, save what is given, do not lose myself in the justice I thought I deserved. Talita's father improved, slowly, and he was discharged with instructions that felt more rueful than hopeful. Talita waved at me when she saw me in the elevator the day after. She seemed to be trying on a new politeness. She thanked me for helping. "He's stubborn, silly," she said, smiling in an attempt to move the conversation elsewhere. Her living room looked, to me, like a place that had always been neutral. Plants on the sill, an art print slightly crooked, the couch with my husband's backpack draped there as if it belonged. Sometimes I would spot her leaving the building at exactly the time my husband said he'd be home, hair curled, makeup precise. Sometimes she would be alone, carrying a brown paper bag from a bakery. The more I saw, the more the pieces lined themselves into memory. There is an interesting, almost clinical cruelty to how the brain sorts the world when it suspects betrayal. It magnifies little things, the way the zipper of a pack had a nick only I noticed, the faint thread I had sewn into the inside pocket for him to find when he traveled. Memories that had been private, the small jokes and repairs of marriage, became pins on a board I kept turning to see if the map fit together. If you had asked me which I wanted, the truth or the illusion, I would have said truth, but at the time I did not know that truth could be calm. I expected the shape of revelation to be catastrophic. Instead, it was paper and pixels and time-stamped receipts. The decisive moment arrived in a public place, which is the only way of doing what I intended without making a spectacle. I chose a cafe that sat across the street from the building where Roberto parked. I sat at a table with an aversion to romance and a notebook in which I made small annotations without looking like I was taking notes. I drank bitter coffee to stay awake and watched the curb as if I had nowhere else to go. Watching someone you love betray you might be one of the quietest forms of grief. You look and look until the edges of the thing have meaning. The first sign that evening was the sound of the familiar engine. His car. A soft, nondescript sedan he'd bought second-hand, gliding into the parking lane. He stepped out of the car with the easy gait of a man who owned the city at 9 p.m. And then Talita appeared from the building with a purposeful stride. She opened the trunk as he neared and reached in to take something. It was fast, no more than a motion, and when she moved, there was the backpack in her hands, slung by the worn strap. He smiled at her in a way that was private and close. It was not a smile I had seen offered to me in months. I took photographs from my seat by the window, not creeping, not intrusive, simply recording what was public. Later, I took a brief video, the kind of short clip any passerby might take of a street scene, enough to show the exchange, enough to timestamp it, enough to place the backpack in hands that were not mine. If you imagine a confrontation at that moment, you will be relieved. There was none. I did not stand and shout, fling accusations like confetti. My understanding was that any dramatic rupture would be for an audience. I did not want an audience. I wanted clarity. And when you record a scene from a legal vantage point, standing in public, phone held plainly, you make truth that is hard to deny. I folded the photos into a folder labeled with the date and the time and added the moment to the narrative I had been building at home. Messages, receipts, a logged-in email with affectionate language. It was enough to make the shape of the truth visible without theatrics. The next step felt like unhooking a bolt rather than slamming a door. I went to see a lawyer, not someone to incite, but someone to protect. The conversation was not a plan for revenge. It was a list of practicalities: how to keep finances safe, how to separate shared liabilities, how to make sure our work interests would not be compromised by private affairs. I asked the basic questions and accepted measured answers. I cancelled the company card he had for incidental expenses and transferred funds into accounts that were mine alone, not because I wanted his money gone, but because I wanted to ensure that whatever unraveling came next did not hurt the life I had built, independently of the marriage. You will not find in what I did any scenes of fury posted online, any humiliating revelations on social media. I chose the contrary route. I assembled a physical dossier. It was not meant to shame, it was meant to be incontrovertible. Receipts printed in black and white, photographs with timestamps visible, screenshots of messages where his name appeared alongside dates and place names, a short video clip taken from the street that showed the backpack being lifted from his trunk to Talita's hands. I wrote a one-page summary, not of betrayal, there is no single line that contains that, but of the facts, where, when, what I had. I placed it in an envelope and addressed it to Talita because I believed two things at once, that she might be complicit and she might be unaware. People arrive at these places from many roads. Compassion does not mean ignoring truth, and truth does not require cruelty. The envelope was not melodramatic. It contained the documents and a single line of paper folded small. Do not worry, the woman you're with is not me. I left it where she would find it. An item of paper slipped under her plant pot in the lobby, an action as quiet as the moment when we first met. I did not post the evidence to shame her. I did not stage a confrontation to transform my pain into spectacle. I wanted, more than anything, to give everyone involved a choice, an opportunity to decide how to respond if they had been unaware, a prompt for honesty if they had been reckless. When Roberto and I finally spoke, it was in the living room where we had watched television together and argued about nothing, and later, sometimes, about everything. There was no shouting, there was no dramatic implosion. I told him calmly that I was aware, and I showed him the dossier. He did not thunder in denial, he did not beg. He had the kind of soft, exhausted apology that comes when the person you love has nowhere else to hide. He packed a bag with the same hands that used to hang pictures on our walls and moved out with an efficiency that hurt more than drama would have. The house breathed differently with his absence, airier and cautious, but not empty. There was space to reconfigure. The practical work of separation took time. I changed locks and closed joint accounts and adjusted the little bureaucratic things you do in the aftermath so your daily life doesn't become a series of friction points. I held on to dignity in the way I answered calls from mutual acquaintances. I did not turn the story into gossip. This was not because I was cold. It was because there are hard and tender things that lose meaning if they are shouted from rooftops. I wanted mine to retain the right to be measured and mine to be private. Healing, in the months that followed, was not a sprint. It was a series of small, deliberate crafts. I converted the guest room, the one with the view of the neighbor's ivy, into a studio. The paint was a soft green, flat and calming, and the windows were left intentionally bare so the light would be honest. I signed up for a ceramics class on a whim because I had always loved the slow geometry of a wheel, the way clay returns to shape under a patient hand. My fingers, clumsy at first, learned to make bowls that were imperfect and beautiful in the way only things made by hand can be. I planted herbs in a window box and watched basil and rosemary become little victories you could clip for dinner. I found friends in small rituals, an evening stamp of postcards to my mother, a weekly walk with Paula where we talked about nothing and everything. On nights when the loneliness curdled into something sharp, I set a small table for one and made a proper dinner, something bright and simple, fish or a warm salad, a glass of wine uncorked with the ceremony I had seen couples perform and made mine. I taught myself to notice the rhythm of my own breathing, to measure how much space one body could actually hold. I read books that showed how people rebuilt, not by erasing the past, but by rearranging it. Years of marriage had given me small tools I could pick up and keep. Patience, thrift, the steady hand to mend a strap. These were the same hands that had once stitched initials into a backpack. They were the same hands that now turned a wheel and planted seeds. Talita moved out after a while. The building gossip was kind and pointed in equal measure. People liked to have stories tidy. When she left, it was not a spectacle. It was parcels in a cab and someone hovering in the lobby like a gasp. The envelope had done its work. Whether she understood in the same way I did, or whether she had chosen to step away, I never fully knew. I told myself the narrative did not need the last word to be clean. It only needed me to be whole. There were days when I surprised myself by the normalcy of my heart. I found a song I liked and let it play while I gardened. I signed up for a small class on drawing shadows and learned how to translate the way light falls on an apple into a line that made sense. I began to sleep later because I did not have to schedule myself around someone else's temperament. The small rituals added up. The studio became a place where friends came with their own broken ceramics and dreams, where we drank coffee and repaired things, and sometimes spoke of sudden heartbreak as if it were weather to be prepared for. One afternoon, months in, I invited a handful of friends over. Paula brought a lemon tart. We sat in the living room that had been rearranged into a space that served me alone and together. I made a little toast with the cheap crystal glasses my grandmother left me and said simply, "To quiet strength." We clinked, and it sounded like a promise. If there is any lesson in all of this, it is not about exposing others or about triumphal vindication. It is about choosing a kind of dignity that resists spectacle. The hardest part of betrayal is not the act itself, but the way it makes you feel like you have to become someone else to respond. I refused that temptation. I chose instead to be methodical and humane. I chose to protect what I had built, without erasing the tenderness that had once been there. I chose to leave room for the possibility that everyone involved carried more than the event they enacted. People ask sometimes whether I regret not making a scene. They ask whether I miss the catharsis of a public confrontation. I tell them no. There is a different kind of power in calm. You can keep your dignity and still be fierce. You can document truth without weaponizing it. You can be a woman who mends straps and spins clay, who calls a lawyer because she deserves to be safe, who moves through sorrow with a measured breath. That kind of strength is not loud, it is durable. On the evenings when the house is quiet now, I sometimes sit by the window in my studio and look at the spot where a backpack once lay on a stranger's couch. I think of the stitch I made in that strap years ago and how small acts connect us in ways we cannot predict. I light a candle and make a small ritual of gratitude for the life that remains to be shaped. It is, I confess, a private little ceremony, a bowl on the table, a pot of tea steeping, and a moment where I allow myself to be proud of the way I kept my dignity intact. If you are listening because you find in these choices a possible path, if you too are collecting the quiet facts before you decide what to do, know this. You are allowed to be methodical and tender at the same time. You are allowed to protect yourself. And you are allowed to build something new out of the fragments that remain. If you want to hear more stories about how people reclaim their lives without spectacle, stay with this channel. Share your own small triumphs in the comments if you feel like it. We read them and learn from one another. For me, the life after was not revenge. It was the slow, steady art of remaking a home into a place I loved to inhabit again. The backpack was a beginning, not an end, and from that beginning came the unglamorous work of returning to myself. One bowl, one plant, one evening at a time.